I grew up in a normal home and family. My father and mother worked, and I studied at school, and I was quite an obedient child. I had always very good relations with my father. We had very close relations. But with mother, we were always at a distance. And when I grew up and I became a teenager, then I had problems with my parents. When I was in the 9th grade, we used drugs already, and so I had a double life. At home I pretended to be an obedient, good child, but in the street I did whatever I wanted. And when I started comparing my symptoms with the symptoms of a real drug addict, I understood that I'm addicted already, and I was really afraid. Once I woke up in the morning and I didn't have drugs and I had pain all over my body, so I decided to commit suicide and to throw myself out from the balcony. I climbed to this cornice. My feet were standing here. I was sitting holding my arms like that. I was bending down a little bit, just along the cornice. At that moment, I understood that one more step and my life would be over. And just at the moment when I was already on my way falling, somebody's hands caught me. These were the hands of my father. My father cried. His hands were shaking. He said to me, "I hope and I'm sure that you will change someday." I went to the hospital 6 or 7 times. And each time when I went to the hospital, I did it for the police, for my parents, but not for myself. So when I decided myself to go to the hospital and I had tests, I found out that I was HIV infected. It was like a bomb for me. I had a great feeling of just fear, and I knew that I was lost.
I'm Makaya Johannes Olivier. I was born at Snowport in 1971. At the time I grew up, my mother and my father passed away. So at that time, I didn't know what to do, and I said myself, I will live my life, and I started sleeping on a dirty place where they dump food. That time was hard because I met some gangster, was drinking and sleeping with different ladies, and he used to use knife and live in the street. It was Friday at night where they used to drink, used to smoke drugs, and there was a lady saw me here. We meet each other here in this place. And I tell myself this, maybe her feelings is for me. And I start to have desire to be with her. But I didn't tell her that I love her. I start to rape her. And as I did that, the next day, I found myself in the cage of a prison. They sentenced me 8 years in prison. And at that same time, I didn't realize that I'm HIV positive. But because I see healthy on my face and on my body, I didn't realize that or recognize that I'm HIV. I told myself I'm not HIV, I'm a well person. But I'm still sick, and my body began huge and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until, Lord, if I'm HIV, what is happening in my life? Where are you now?
Both of my parents came from Taiwan, but were born in China. They immigrated here to come here for graduate school. They were married in New York. My parents, we weren't Christian, but they raised me with traditional Chinese values, work hard, do well in school.
Bless the food in front of us. In Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen.
As a kid, I was pretty well behaved, and yet I kind of knew I was different. You know, I mean, right off the bat, just the way I looked. You know, I was Chinese, and most of the other kids weren't. I was smaller than most of the other kids, and never good at sports, and so I never really fit in. Then, at an early age, I was exposed to pornography when I was just 9 years old. That really gave me a distorted view of what sexuality is and what God intended it to be. And it was at that point that I realized that that there was this attraction that I didn't really understand to both sexes. Then when I got into dental school, I moved down to Louisville, Kentucky, which is 6 hours away from Chicago. And it was then that I began to experiment with all these things that, you know, most kids experimented in college, you know, going out to the bars and just, you know, experimenting, you know, sexually. Along with going to the bars, I came across some the gay clubs, and so I started going to those and decided that this is the way, you know, this is who I was.
One day he came home around Easter. He admitted he was living in the gay lifestyle.
You know, was in and out relationships, and just really, it wasn't fulfilling. You know, I still was lonely, and so I looked for, I guess, satisfaction elsewhere, and I started doing drugs. Being a dental student, I didn't really have much money, so I had to, you know, kind of scrounge up just to pay for $30, $40, you know, per hit. But then I realized that, you know, if I bought extra, I kind of get a discounted price, and then, you know, if I kind of sell the extra that I had to my friends, then I could kind of pay for my own hit. By that first month, I was selling over 100 hits of ecstasy, like they were pre-sold before I even got them. I was selling to my classmates, selling to my professors. As kind of the time went on, my focus became less and less on school, but more on this you know, fast-paced life that I was living. Finally, school had enough.
He was expelled by the dental school, and right 2 months before he graduated to receive his doctorate degree.
I was so wrapped up in this lifestyle that, you know, I thought, hey, you know, who cares? Who needs a degree? Who needs to be a doctor? I moved from Louisville, Kentucky down to Atlanta, Georgia. I had met somebody that I thought, you know, was the perfect match for me. I moved in with him, and I just kept living, you know, the way I had been living, which was, you know, very promiscuous and getting high all the time, and I continued to sell drugs, but I had moved on to selling a lot of the kind of the club drugs, Special K, acid, cocaine, mushrooms, steroids. I was supplying drugs to dealers in over 11 states in the Southeast.
During those 5-6 years, seeing that the law is away from us because Christopher's situation getting worse and worse and worse.
My parents began to pray a very bold prayer, and that prayer was, you know, asking God that, you know, do whatever it takes to turn my life around and to get my attention. This answer to prayer came one day. It was just like a knock on the door, and, you know, I was expecting just, you know, a friend or someone, you know, another dealer, and I opened up the door, and it wasn't any of my friends. It turned out to be 12 DEA agents, Atlanta police, and 2 big German Shepherd dogs. I then was sentenced to 6 years in prison. I really didn't think things could get any worse. Then about 2 days after Christmas, they called me out of the cell block. They said, you know, you're going over to see the doctor. And a nurse called me in and she sat me down in her office. She told me, I've got some bad news for you. Your blood tests have come back and you're HIV positive. It was definitely the darkest moment of my life.
I was at the age of 14 when I got to be a Christian. I always doing exam at school and not passing anything and so forth. So I make a promise to God. I said to God, say, if you help me to pass, I will serve you. He let me pass 2 times. At the age of 20, I met my husband and I got married. You know, going into the church, I was marching into the church. My husband was standing at the altar. At this point, I was about to faint when I was standing at the altar. This is when Rose was doing the ceremony.
I officiated at their wedding. I was the marriage officer. And then after they got married, the husband began to get sick. And I asked her many times, is there something wrong? Why he's so sick all the time? But he wouldn't say a word until things get really worse. He only kept on saying that he's sick, he's not going to make it. And the last lie that he told was that he had cancer. She was so concerned. She kept on, she says to me, Mom, I don't believe a word he's saying. I don't think it's cancer.
He was asking me if, I found out that if he is sick, if I would leave him, I told him no. He asked me if I found out that he have a disease, if I would leave him, I also told him no. I asked him why. So I said to him, so, well, remember our married vows? We said for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. And I decided that I'm going to stick to my side of that. And he told me that he is HIV positive. I found out in 98 and he died 99. You know, I was a bit shocked, but I was also anxious to go and did the test also because I wanted to find out if I was negative or positive. I was married 2 years before I found out that I'm positive.
And that really, really devastated her life.
I told my father and my mother. It didn't went well. They didn't say to me that, yes, we are going to see you through this or anything.
It's like they didn't want nothing to do with her. And she suffered a lot with rejection and abandonment.
My son, my handsome son.
My name is Siobhan Flemings and I am 8 years old.
Everything, all about him, he's not serious about anything. Hi, young man. You are not working with me at all. You know, he's a good boy. I love my son very much. About 3 weeks ago, we were here lying down and I was saying to him, Siobhan, have you ever seen on the television about HIV/AIDS? He said yes. So I said to him, so I'm going to explain something to you. I don't know if you will understand, but I'm going to try and explain. So I said to him, so that you are HIV positive.
First, I never knew I have HIV. And then she told me that I have it.
I was born with it. It's sad. It's very, very sad.